Welcome to Divine Context Ministries. My name is Angelo Pringle. I am the founder of Divine Context Ministries. Our mission here at Divine Context Ministry is to teach those who are learned and unlearn, those who are saved and unsaved, how to read the Bible. God introduced me to the faith of Jesus Christ in 1999, and one of the results of my ministry is Divine Context, Volume 1, Old Testament, a book of divine understanding, available at Amazon and on other online retailers throughout the world. In the ministry, my passion is to teach the Bible according to the righteousness of Jesus Christ and according to the example of our first generation apostles, saints, and disciples. Tonight's discussion, we're going to be talking about when we are weak, then we are strong. This is the testimony of the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians. We're going to finish 2 Corinthians up. Again, we're going to be talking about this when we are weak, then we are strong. And Paul was actually giving a little bit of his testimony. When it comes to 2 Corinthians, to be honest, it gives us a little bit of depth into Paul's mind state as he was going through what he was going through in the book of Acts. And as we finish it up, I just want you to understand that this battle as a Christian, it's always easy to stand strong when there's nothing to oppose you or nothing, no resistance. But as we seek to do God's will, the most resistance we're going to get is from our own personal will. So with God giving us the strength to become weak and not following our own self-righteousness and to acknowledge him in all our ways, that is truly the power of God. And I ask any and everyone to please seek God for that strength. Once we know God's will, we have a little more responsibility. I would say God does have mercy on us to get it right over a period of time, but we don't want to play with that, because once we talk about this weakness and everything as far as the strength of God and the power of God, and as we grow in this thing, we become weak to ourselves. And that's what the Bible tries to teach us, to become weak to our own self-will. And Apostle Paul has a great ministry. He has a great testimony, but he went through some things. He went through a lot of things. And 2 Corinthians gives us a great example of some of the things that he went through and his mind state as he went through these things. And what Paul also explains, that sometimes we'll be in a situation and God will not remove that situation. He will just simply give us strength to go through that situation. And I know each of us has really experienced things where we were going through things we wanted to be removed from us. But God doesn't remove it. No matter how much we cry to him, no matter how much we seek him, that situation don't go away. And if we truly love God and we truly want to do right by God, he gives us strength to just continually endure and power through and learn. And one of the things in here we're going to read, that when it talks about Paul enduring, he actually talks about how God gives him the skill to maneuver situations, and that spiritual skill to have the mind state, to have the approach, to have the attitude, to have the mentality that when things are not going fine and dandy, he find a way to say, you know what, I'm gonna let God take care of this. And Paul got chased everywhere, and that's what we're gonna go over, that thorn in his flesh. And when it comes to the thorn in his flesh, it's simply Paul wanted his kin people. He wanted his kindred. He wanted the Jews to just kind of like, give me a break, brothers. Like, God, back them up off me so I can minister your word. And God was like, no. And that was all a part of Paul's testimony. It was all a part of, God's whole scheme in the midst of his testimony. And God told him that from the start. And that's why I say sometimes when God calls us, Lord have mercy, I wish I was somebody that can be secure to the point where I didn't have to worry about nothing. But God don't work like that. And he don't work like that when it comes to many of us serving him. So I just encourage everybody that's serving God's will to just have not only a humble heart, but seek God with all your heart, with all your mind, and try to get away from self, because I know about self. Self will have you in a mind state of destruction, because self gonna tell you that little angel on that left, he gonna tell you, man, handle that. Sister, handle that. Don't worry about it. But that, glory be to God, that angel on your right gonna tell you, nah, I think we need to do God's will. So I just encourage anybody who's going through anything to continue to focus on God. And we're gonna get into this 2 Corinthians, and you're gonna see that Paul, he is our chief. He is one of the chief apostles. He is one of our great examples in this thing. And Paul was like, hey, when I'm weak, that's when I'm strong. He's not just saying that himself. That's the message God relayed to him when God told him he was not going to remove his kin people, the Jews, following him and persecuting him and, trying to stone him and trying to kill him on every corner. God said, I'm not going to remove that. You're just going to have to bear with it, because this is going to be a part of the testimony that you're going to serve. So when it comes to our testimonies, sometimes we don't know what God's going to take us through to take us to that next level. But we're going to start in 2 Corinthians. I just want y'all to really pay attention to Paul's testimony, because Paul is a great example for us. No doubt, he wrote the majority of the letters in the Bible, the New Testament of the Bible. And his ministry is awesome, because I want to show you beforehand, like the change. I would say Trudy today, homegirl out of Sebring, she posted something a few days ago, but it ran across my timeline. And I asked her, I said, can I share it? And it was, so cool to me, because this is what it said. One reason people resist change is because they focus on what they have to give up instead of what they have to gain. That is a true and awesome saying. A lot of time we truly fret about, man, what about this and what about that, when it comes to what we're going to lose when we develop a new mind state and develop a new thought process towards doing right by God. And a lot of times we're going to lose a lot of ourselves and that freedom that we feel like we have to do what we want to do, but we don't think about what we're going to gain. All of the times that we've been in God and we've said, I want to do right by God, and then we fall short, a lot of times we make that commitment. What happens is God gives us strength over a period of time to overcome those things that's contrary to his will. And, those are the things that we should be, happy for. But the struggle is real until the point we don't even think about a lot of times what we have overcome, because it's a continual battle. So when it comes to that, don't think about what you're going to lose in any situation. And I would say, even taking it from the spiritual all the way to the physical, when it comes to, relationships, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to just many things in our lives, the possibility can be endless if we can focus on what we can do as opposed to what we're going to lose. And we know we're in a situation that's not really taking us to the level that we want to be in. So I'm going to jump in 2 Corinthians, talk about Paul's testimony a little bit. I'm going to take you to Acts so you can see that Paul wasn't a chump. Paul wasn't a soft guy. Paul was a really strong-willed individual, and he had the education and he had the influence to be that individual, to be strong. And Paul was not looking to be saved. Paul was really looking for the truth, but he didn't know what the truth was. And as he looked for the truth, that is why I feel, I don't know, I can't question nobody else, but I feel that God actually introduced himself to Paul and introduced Jesus Christ into Paul's heart, because Paul wanted the truth and he was going about it strong. I'm talking about persecuting and, ready to kill and crush anybody that was contrary to God's will, because he took it very serious. And God truly blessed him with the, testimony of Christ and called him and let him know that you're going to go through some things. But for Paul to say that when he is weak, then he is strong, that means a lot because of the temperament. That means a lot because of the calling. That means a lot because of who he once was as an individual before he got saved, before he got introduced to Jesus Christ. It is a very big deal. We brush across Paul, like, okay, we know that's Paul. But no, this is somebody that was totally against Christianity, totally against Jesus Christ. And for him to stand strong and do everything that he can to do God's will, that is a mighty testimony. And we don't have to go through half of that. So when we talk about that thorn in the flesh, and we're going to make it make sense. We're going to start at 2 Corinthians 12 and 5. And we're in the back part of 2 Corinthians, so Paul has already discussed a lot of things. He says, of such an one will I glory, yet of myself I will not glory, but in my infirmities. For though I would desire to glory, I should not be a fool. For I will say the truth, but now I forbear, lest any man should think of me above that which he seeth me to be, or that which he heareth of me. This is very important. We'll be coming back to it. He says, unless I should be exalted above measure. This above measure also is very important. We'll be discussing that. He says, lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan, to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that means 3 times, that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. He goes on to say in verse 11, I am become a fool in glorying. Ye have compelled me, for I ought to have been commended of you, for in nothing am I behind the very chiefest apostles, though I be nothing. Now, for him to talk about himself being nothing, this is the weakness that he's talking about. But you see, he asked God 3 times to remove the thorn in the flesh. And he didn't say a thorn in my flesh, he said a thorn in the flesh. That thorn represents Paul's kindred. If you look at all the times that Paul went through something throughout the book of Acts, out of the 17 individual situations that he went through, 15 of those situations involved the Jews, his own family members, his own kindred, his own bloodline. You know, like they say, you know, blood is thicker than water. Well, it wasn't thicker than water when it came to Paul preaching and teaching the gospel. So the Jews chased him. And this is what Paul is begging God to please, you know, just let him give me a break. And God was like, nope, not giving you a break. I'm going to let you wear this thing. And once we go back to Acts, you're going to see that Ananias, when God told him to go speak to Paul, he was afraid. But God told him, say, no, I got him. He's going to be all right. But he's going to suffer many things because of my name. And when it comes to Paul, we think that we are strong-willed. Paul, he took on more than the challenge. Paul was, you know, he was ready to murder. Paul was ready to kill anybody that went contrary to God's will according to the Old Testament, and especially those who are calling themselves following Jesus. And you are a Jew, so you say you're following Jesus because of what the Old Testament says? No, we got to crush you. So this is a person with a strong personality, with a powerful, you know, mentality towards what he believed in, and God changed him. And God let him know not following his own self-will made him strong. You know how powerful that is when it comes to the strength of God, the righteousness of God, the mercy that God shows us. And I can relate because I was a strong-willed person. So when it comes to someone having their mind altered and their thought process altered to do God's will, this has got to be of God, because we go through a lot, but we don't think about us being strong when it comes to doing right by God. We don't think about being weak to ourselves is being strong to God, but it is. And to the world, that's crazy, because to the world, it's about trendsetter. It's about let's do our own thing. And I'm not talking about everyday work, and I'm not talking about just, you know, providing for your family, and especially when it's in accordance with God's will, but I'm talking about those things that love your neighbor as yourself. Getting in the word and truly trying to understand it if that's your calling. And even on the lower level, when it comes to somebody that's not, your calling is not teaching and preaching, but you just know better. You just do things and you're like, I just feel better if I just do my own will, but I still love God. Well, loving God is doing God's will. And that's one of the most difficult tasks that I ever experienced. And for a person to say that Christians, you know, I did have a person say Christians weak and soft, but brother, just try it. One of the most humbling things it is not to want to be able to do right by God, but not being able to. And we know that from our insides, and we know that from the thing that we go through. And a lot of individuals don't take on that task, so they really don't know that battle. Once you truly take on that battle of trying to serve God, it's a never-ending uphill climb, because you want to always try to do right by God, because we're going to have experiences every day of our life. And the nature of Christ that God places in our hearts, slowly but surely, it just turns us. Slowly but surely, it just molds us. Slowly but surely, it just helps us to do right by God. But it's not an overnight process, so we got to accept it and learn how to be weak to ourselves. Let me give you a little something on this Paul. 2 Corinthians, it's all about the apostles' doctrine, the apostles' authority, the apostles' ministry, Paul and those ministers. These individuals went through a lot, and it's our example. So I just want to show you a little something about Paul and his strong demeanor, the individual he was, so we can understand that when he start sticking his chest out, that this is not something just to be doing. I'm going to start off in Acts 22:3, and I'm going to read 1 through 3. I'm just going to show you a few things. It says, men, brother, and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make now unto you. And when they heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence. And he said, I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God, as ye all are this day. He says, and I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women. Now, this is a mean testimony, because this individual, Paul, he was actually killing people, persecuting people to the death, just because they wasn't following the Old Testament standard as he felt like they should follow, because he felt like they were blaspheming. So his mind state was totally different from having a personal beef with somebody. He was in a system, and him being in that system, he had a strong will toward that system. And you see, he came up under the feet of Gamaliel. He was a very influential individual in the Jewish faith. If you go back to chapter, I think it's 4 or 5, when they was prosecuting Peter and the other apostles, when the Gospels first came about through the gift of the Holy Ghost on the day of Pentecost, after a while, those guys went to preaching and teaching, and Gamaliel had to kind of pull the high priest of the Jews back, because they was going to kill Peter and the rest of the apostles. So this guy, Gamaliel, he was a mighty person. And Paul is trying to tell those individuals that, hey, y'all finna try to prosecute me, but I was just like y'all, brother. I was, strong in this thing. So his will is very strong towards what he believed in, but that became weak so that he can become strong in the new covenant. Powerful, very powerful. 9 and 13, so you can see this guy's reaction. This is Ananias. If you see right here in 10, the guy's Ananias. God came to him in a vision. This is after God had introduced himself to Paul while Paul was on his way to Damascus to persecute Christians. God told Ananias to go speak to Paul. He's in the street called Straight. He's in the house of one called Judas. And go speak to him, because, he's one of us now. And look at verse 13, how Ananias responded. He says, then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard by many of this man how much evil he has done to thy saints at Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all that call on thy name. But the Lord said unto him, go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. Verse 16, for I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. Wow. Just imagine Paul going through what he's going through, and he know for a fact he has to listen to God. He's going to suffer many things. And that word suffer meaning he's going to go through some things. But the reason why he's going to go through some things is because he's going to have the strength from God to allow himself to go through these things. This is what hinders our growth a lot of times. We don't even allow ourselves to go through things. We don't even allow ourselves to submit to God's will because it's just too painful, especially when we think about peer pressure. A lot of individuals don't think about that grown people can go through peer pressure just like teenagers or just like young adults. I don't care how old you are. If you are influenced by crowd, if you're influenced by other individuals, how they think about you, you're going to go through some peer pressure. You're going to be influenced to not do God's will and kind of follow the crowd, or kind of like, want to be recognized or want to be a part of something, when although those individuals are contrary to God's will. Well, this is something that Paul was saying, that when he is weak, he is strong. This is our example. We should become weak to our will or anything that's contrary to God's will, and then we're strong in God. Then, as lonely as it may seem in that situation, we're strong. And that's how our hearts become open for God to pour more in. But we have to have that same sacrifice to know that God said that Paul was going to suffer. We suffer in the same manner. Our suffering is to neglecting of ourselves so that we can do right by God. Little by little, God teaches us. God helps us. Every day we wake up is another chance to get it right. I don't care how much we messed up yesterday. I don't care how much you messed up 1 minute ago. As long as you got a mind state to think about God to focus on God, we can get it right. Now, a lot of times we get frustrated situationally, but to be honest, regardless of what our finances is, God is going to show us favor eventually as long as we keep striving. But we got to understand that our needs is different from our wants. And God is going to always give us what we need, even though he's not going to always give us what we want. Because as a child of God, sometimes what we want, that's what's going to really hinder us from doing right by God. And that's just the reality of the Christian faith. All right, we're going to 1 Corinthians, and I want to show you this weakness. And this is something I know every one of us struggle with. We struggle with temptations as far as just doing what you want to do, the things we like to do, the pleasure we indulge in. These things are hard to let go of. But those things become the power of God whenever we can let go. Even when it comes to how we treat one another, how we treat our wife, how we treat our husband, how we treat our friend, how we treat our parents. Sometimes they do things and can say things that we don't like. But their behavior should not dictate how we respond. This is what God wants us to understand when it comes to our personal responsibility towards him. The Apostle Paul, when we go in Acts, you read a lot about his ministry, but once you get into 2 Corinthians, this helps you to understand his mind state. This helps you understand why he allows so many things to happen. It's not like he wasn't praying to God, and it's not like he didn't want to do his own will, but he had to comprehend God's will and know that, boy, I hate this. I hate them chasing me. I hate them prosecuting me. I hate them stoning me. God, I'm doing your will. Why is this happening to me? That's the example. A lot of times we go through things. God, I'm doing your will. Why is this happening to me? If you're serving God, you're not weak. If you're trying to do right by God, you're not weak. If you are seeking God's will, it's not weakness. I don't care how people look at you. I don't care what situation you get in, like say turn the cheek. It could be a situation where it'd be like, man, you need to handle that. And you say, no, I'm going to do God's will. You're not weak. You're actually strong, very strong. And I commend you because every person who's trying to do God's will should understand when they see a situation to where a person can react a certain way and they don't, and they do God's will as opposed to their own will, even when it comes to pleasure, even when it comes to things that we can have fun and indulge in, and you say, no, you know what? I'm going to do God's will, and you try to get it right. That's power. That's the power that we're going to be going over right now in 1 Corinthians, and you're going to see how Paul was talking about. That's foolishness when it comes to somebody that don't want to do God's will, but when it comes to doing God's will, it is actually power. I'm going to start at 1:21. It says, "For after that, in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believed." Say the foolishness of preaching. He says, "For the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks, which are the Gentiles, seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified." That's going to come up, Christ crucified. That's going to come up in 2 Corinthians when we go back there. So it's important. It says, "Unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness." It's a stumbling block because Christ didn't do his own will. Christ was strong in that he allowed himself to be crucified. Christ was strong in that he allowed himself to do God's will. He wasn't a robot. He was actually going through things. He didn't want to be crucified. He didn't want to argue with these individuals. He didn't want to do that, but it was all a part of God's will. And that's why he kept to the disciples, hey, let it be. How can the scriptures be fulfilled? He knew what he had to go through. That's actually power. And that's the power of God within him. Same power that we try to seek for and try to strive for. And that's why it's a stumbling block when it comes to individuals, because not doing our will and doing God's will look crazy to a lot of people. He says in 24, "But unto them which are called, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God," says, "because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." Read 25 again. "Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For you see your calling, brethren, how that not many men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound," that means confuse, "the wise, And God has chosen the weak things of the world to confuse the things that are mighty. And base things of the world and things which are despised has God chosen, yes. The things which are not, meaning nothing, that's not appealing, that's not sexy, that doesn't look powerful, to bring to nothing things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. But of him are ye in Christ Jesus, who of God is made unto us wisdom and righteousness, sanctification, and redemption, that according as it is written, he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord. Look what 2:1-3 says. And our brother, when I came unto you, came not with excellency of speech or of wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God. For I determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. Now, this don't mean that he was afraid of them. This don't mean that Paul, when he came to them preaching, he was weak in the sense that he was a sorry and no good at person. He was talking about towards God's will. He was talking about being weak. Trembling meaning respect towards God's will. He wasn't in this trying to do it his own way. He was seeking God's will. And when we talk about these necessities, when we go back to 2 Corinthians, those necessities is talking about those things which are in God's will that's necessary for us to do so we can stay in accordance with God's will. So Paul is, he's standing strong saying, hey, brothers, the weakness of God is stronger than men. And that weakness is just simply doing God's will. And of all individuals, remember, this man was a killer. This man was a awesome person in the sense of, hey, I believe what I believe, and y'all doing wrong, and I'm finna crush y'all. So for him to have that mind state and turn away from that and say that doing my own will is, contrary to God's will, and yeah, that may look strong, but actually it ain't no good in God's eyes. Denying my self-will is strong in God. And that's something that we don't see in the Christian faith when it comes to even leadership. Leadership does their own thing and neglect the congregations a lot of times because we want to put on a show. We want to, make it sound good. We want to, I don't really care about giving you true context. I want to just make it sound good and put on a good performance and let's have some fun in here in that sense. When the reality is, that's your will. That's not God's will. God's will is for his people to be able to understand his word. God's will is for you to teach somebody the truth of his will so they can become independent. So when they by themselves, when they're home by themselves and reading this word, they can comprehend it. When they comprehend it, they can become stronger. When they become stronger, then old man becomes weaker because now you got something to fight with. And that's what leadership is supposed to be doing. I know we get caught up into the clique mentality, and these are my people, and this is my church, and this is my pastor. And the thing about it is, when we're going to go back to 2 Corinthians, and Paul is going to talk to the ministers and let them know, hey, don't be boasting to other people. Hey, don't be looking up to other people. You got to get this right. And as you got to get it right, the same individual that's over there that seems like he knows what he's talking about or she knows what he's talking about, they got the same Bible that you got. They got the same words and they have the same testimony that is provided by us. So nobody's getting nothing that wasn't already given. So everybody's on the same level. And that's why I try to teach independence so that we can get it right. Because having fun with one another while we holding hand and fellowshipping, that's cool when we by ourselves. But when we with our spouses, when our children have made us mad, when we on the job and upset, those are the times when we need that strength. Those are the times when we need the truth of the word to guide us. And this is what Paul is trying to get everyone to understand, that when it comes to being weak, that's when we're strong in God's will. Let's run on and go on back to this 2 Corinthians, get a little foundation of Paul's testimony and see exactly where he's coming from when he's talking about this measure, beyond measure, so he won't jump out and get all big and bold. 2 Corinthians 12, I'm going to just read 7 again. I'm throwing in the flesh. You see when Paul says right here in 2 Corinthians 7, he says, unless I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan, to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. This above measure represents his testimony. This above measure represents his calling. So even though somebody may seem like they're a minister or they are a teacher or they are a bishop or whoever they may be, their calling has a limit. And that limit is to stay within your calling. Don't go beyond and do anything contrary to God's will to try to get an individual to believe. And I've been in situations where a person say, well, you know what? We need to start singing more so we can bring the people in. Or we need to start getting more personal when it comes to the psychology of the human mind and what people go through so that we can touch their feelings. Well, I want to let you know this. When it comes to truth, your feelings don't matter. This Bible, feelings don't matter. Before we was here, this Bible was here. When we're gone, this Bible is going to be here. So it's not about a feeling. It's about understanding. It's not about a feeling. It's about truly in your heart accepting and manifesting what God wants us to do. I want to show you about this measure, and I'm going to show you what Paul was saying about that measure, that he's an apostle, and although he's an apostle, mighty man of God, he can't go beyond. He can't do things contrary to God's will to try to help you believe. All he can do is tell you the truth. And in telling you the truth, he's hoping that you take heed. And when you take heed, God can also build you into exactly who you're supposed to be in God. These testimonies and these words are powerful because they are our examples. God, what you want me to do? Read the Bible and look at these examples and understand that these things wasn't just written just to be written. Look at 10 and 12 of 2 Corinthians. He says, and this is Paul. He just got through talking up here in verse 8 about the authority. If you see verse 8, he says, for though I should boast somewhat more of our authority, which the Lord has given us for edification and not for your destruction, I should not be ashamed. And he was talking about that authority that God had given him and the individuals that's going about preaching and teaching the gospel. And that's why when he gets down to 12, he says, for we dare not to make ourselves of the number or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves, but they measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves are not wise. But we will not boast of things without our measure, but according to the measure of the rule which God has distributed to us, a measure to reach even unto you. For we stretch not ourselves beyond our measure, as though we reach not unto you, for we are come as far as to you also in preaching the gospel of Christ. And 15, not boasting of things without our measure, that is, of other men's labors, but having hope when your faith is increased, that we shall be enlarged by you according to our rule abundantly. You see how he keeps saying our rule, our measure? When you're reading the Bible, and we get loose with interpretation, when we're reading the Bible, we got to understand from the book of Acts to the book of Revelation, everything in between is the apostles' testimony. So when Paul is talking about our rule, our measure, and we want to be enlarged by you, what he's asking everybody to do, even these 2,000 years later, even us ministers, he's asking us, when we go out, stay within that standard. We enlarge the apostles' ministry when we just tell the truth. We enlarge the apostles' testimony and their behavior and their example, we just tell the truth and stay in our place. But in doing so, that's how we're strong, because we resist our own self-will. And not to just beat up on the church or the believers, but we see this thing so out of whack. We see this thing, people everywhere. You know, everybody got an opinion. Everybody can just pick up the Bible and just read it, just whatever, and just, this is what it means to me. When we go on, you're going to see in verse 16, he's asking these individuals, as you go preach, as you go teach, as you go minister about the gospel, stay in your lane. Stay in your lane and understand God gave us this authority to preach and teach the gospel. This is the purpose of 2 Corinthians, to understand that what these individuals went through, Paul and the rest of these ministers, so that we can know following their standard is being strong. Following their commandments in God is being strong. Just like he said that, hey, when I'm weak, I'm strong. We have to be weak to our own self-will so that we can be strong to God even as we read the word. And when we go on, look exactly what he says in 16. He says, to preach the gospel in the regions beyond you, and not to boast in another man's line of things made ready at our hand. The testimony of Paul, the testimony of Peter, the testimony of Christ, the testimony of all these things are definitely at our hand. We can pick up this Bible, we can read it anytime we want. But what he's trying to say, if you're going to do that, and when we do that, we got to stay in line. We can't take the word, and especially leaders. I'm really speaking to leaders and individuals who consider themselves ministers. We have to learn this Bible, and we have to stay in our lane, because when he said we don't go beyond our measure, when he was saying right here, when he was talking right here in 10 and 14, when he says, for we stretch not ourselves beyond our measure, as though we reach not unto you. Stretching himself beyond his measure is to preach the word outside of the truth. We as individuals, and I mean any one of us, we have to do these things within the boundaries of God's will. That shows strength. When it comes to the letter of 2 Corinthians, God is trying to just teach every one of us. When we do his will, we're strong. Yes, we're weak because we're not doing what we want to do concerning ourselves. But when it comes to his will, we're strong. And what that does is opens the door for God to teach us more and more. Show you what the rest of this thing says. That's why Paul, once again, I'm going to 12. Look at 9. Paul said, when God said to him, and he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. That word perfect means supremely skilled. If you look it up in the original language, he wanted Paul to become skilled in how he handles situations that he didn't like. He said, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. Chapter 13, read the verse 5. This is the third time I am coming to you. In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. I told you before and foretell you as if I were present the second time. And being absent now, I write to them which heretofore have sinned, and to all other, that if I come again, I will not spare, since ye seek a proof of Christ speaking in me, which towards you is not weak, but is mighty in you. For though he was crucified through what? Weakness, yet he liveth by the power of God. For we also are weak in him, but we shall live with him by the power of God towards you. Look what 5 says. Examine yourself whether ye be in the faith. Prove your own selves. Know ye not your own selves how that Jesus Christ is in you, except ye be reprobates? This is the question Paul asked them. And this is what I want everybody to understand. Paul is truly our example. All right. Jesus Christ is our ultimate example. He is the Son of God. He is our ultimate example. Divine Context Ministry is about teaching. When you read 2 Corinthians, understand that this letter is talking about the apostle authority. This letter is talking about how we must understand that this Bible was not written just to be written. That these individuals that went through these things, they went through it so that we can have a great example. And as we read this, we have to understand, and we should understand, that when we're doing God's will, that is when we are at our best. When we're doing our own will, that is when we are at our worst. When we're doing God's will, that helps God to open doors of understanding for us, so that when we get in situations, we can be more skilled and handle them better and be able to move to another level in God. Now, our everyday lives, just living and going about, We don't think about a lot of decisions that we make because we just in the hustle and bustle of things. But truly, Paul showed us that God did not remove the Jews beating him, chasing him. And the fact that he still obeyed God in the midst of all that showed that that was his strength. That is when he was strong. And that's how God gave him revelations. That's how God gave him understanding of his will. These are the things God wants us to do. I know this teaching is not sexy. I know that this teaching is not dynamic, but it's truth. This teaching is something that you can go in, understand when you read, when you're by yourself, when you're at home, you can pick up the Bible, you can get the understanding of these individuals' testimony and know that their examples are truly for us to follow, for us to accept, and for us to understand that these are not characters in a movie scene or just characters in a fictional book. They went through these things so we can have these examples. They went through these things to show us that it's possible. Paul, murderer, killer, strong man, smart, sharp, all that. But he had to start neglecting self so that he can become strong in God. And we as individuals, we don't even have too much of that even on our plate. And that's what we can do also. So when it comes to 2 Corinthians, when it comes to being weak, when it comes to being strong, know that when we are weak to ourselves, we're strong in God. And this is what God seeks for us to do so that he can take us to the next level if that's what we want to do. If that's how we consider ourselves loving God. Because this is not about a feeling. This is actually about a manifestation of making better decisions no matter what we're facing. And that's what God wants us to know above all. Brothers, don't think that you're weak because you're doing God's will. Never think that. Don't care about what nobody say. Because ultimately, when we lay down, go to that grave, no matter what we have, no matter who around, all that's going to matter is that we have a heart to accept God's will and God's way. God bless everybody. Thank you and peace.